Hello, everybody. This is Trip. I'm here with Jake and Jack because it is time for some God beyond humanity. No humans needed. We're transhuman today, and I feel like I'm just waiting for a Matrix reference. You know, was that what you're here for, Jack?
Can't avoid that. That's right.
So, Jacob, as we're going into the last week, any thoughts or framing? Like, I know you've engaged Jack in this material before, so is there anything we should have on our minds as we start to wrestle with it?
I mean, I would say what's interesting about the transhuman stuff, I mean, Jack, you've gestured toward it in some of your past work, but it's become a lot more explicit recently, especially in the On Religion book and the hermeneutics book has some stuff about it too. This is still new territory for me and for a lot of people, obviously, so I don't have a ton of thoughts on it, but I would just say I'm happy that we're covering it, but I'm also sad that this course is coming to a close so soon.
Yeah, you're so depressed. You have to go get married. I'm sure
That's true.
We have to break this off so Jake can get married.
I know. I'm
got preparations to make.
Yep. Got plenty to do.
Well, nothing says anticipating marital bliss like a discussion of the impending recession of humanity and rise and takeover of technology. So with that, Jack, we're ready. Preacher, we need to hear the good news.
Yeah, I quite honestly think this is not only the future. This is the present. We're into it. We're on a big roller coaster, and getting to the peak, and we're going to start zooming into the depths of this thing with an accelerating rate. So it's sort of like the expansion of the universe. It's increasing at an increasingly accelerating rate, and it's as I always like to say, it's your problem, not mine. I'm retired, and this is. I would say right now that the two largest challenges that theology must confront are climate change and the environmental crisis, in which theology has to speak up. I don't know that it's a problem. It's a problem where the voice of theology needs to be heard, and the other one is this: is the what we call the problem of transhumanism and posthumanism. Now, it's useful to distinguish those two terms. The word transhumanism is short for transitional humanism. So it's in the transition from the human to the post-human. And the post-human would actually be lifting human life and intelligence off its biological substrate and transforming it, transplanting it, even that's a biological metaphor, relocating it to a post-biological substrate. In which case you would literally be, people say, but then we wouldn't be human anymore, and that's not an objection, that's the definition. That's what it is, it's what it means. And it's fraught with theological implications, and implications for theology, and theology has things to say about it, I think. So I think it's one of the two most exciting questions for theology. I don't think theology is going to be able to conduct business as usual in the future. I mean, it never could really, but now it's in a much more profound. We're entering a much more profound crisis, a much more profound transformation. I mean, there are people who talk about a point where human beings in their biological nature will be preserved the way we would preserve in a museum or in a zoo. where transhumans would be able to visit and see what biological life used to be like. The way you would go to Williamsburg and visit the actors who are reenacting for you what it was like to live in the 18th century. And one could imagine a future like that, where human beings will be preserved for historical interest. And we would be visited by posthumans who would be curious about what it was like back then. That's not that's unthinkable to us, but that's not unthinkable. What lies ahead? Derrida talks about the future that you can foresee and the future that you can't. And he calls the one the future present and the other one the absolute future. Well, if you want to talk about an absolute future, that is to say, one where horizons will be shattered, expectations will be left in shards, and we will enter into a sphere that we cannot imagine now. Eye hath not seen nor ear heard. This is it. This is it. And this is not crazy stuff. This is not sci-fi. I mean, sci-fi is often an imaginative leap into something that science is working on. And I think myself, I mean, I'm 78 years old. I am not going to see this. But I think this is what's coming. And it's deeply theological, I think. And that's what so I want to wrap this course up by looking towards the future, towards what's to come. The event is the coming of what we cannot see coming. There it is. And by the way, I think this is another topic. This belongs on the why do Derrida list that you did once before. I think what Derrida had to say is becoming more and more verified. That is, we're entering into a world where the program, the gramme, is everything. We're entering into a world where where we have to think in terms of differential systems, not atomic elements. And where the whole question is whether or not these systems are completely programmable and closed down, or whether they're, as Derrida predicts, open-ended. So I think everything that Derrida had to say, so the old materialist objection against Derrida, that he was a textualist, meaning he was concerned with books, not reality, has proven to be the most horrendously stupid objection against Derrida that was ever made at all. It's what almost everything Derrida is saying in terms of differential systems and program and programmability and unprogrammability is being played out for us in a vivid way right now. That was just a word from our sponsor. I mean, that's not what I'm going to talk about right now. What I do want to do is go back to start with one of my favorite books on this subject, which is old by current standards. It was written back in the 90s. And it's written by this man, Michel Serres, S-E-R-R-E-S, Michel Serres, who is sort of the master and the fellow from whom Latour was inspired. I mean, I think a lot of what Latour is doing was set in motion by Serres, who was he sat at the feet of Serres. And Serres wrote this book called Angels, A Modern Myth. And it was published in English and French back in, well, that's the English translation of it. The French translation of La Légende des Anges, The Legend of Angels, was the French title. And the word legend meant not only the story, the old narrative, the epic of angels, but or the fiction of angels, but also meant legendum. That is to say, what you would get at the end of a book when you looked up the names and places. And he wanted to say that the angels were indexes, which are to be read, in which we can read off contemporary technology. So he built this wonderful construction of an analogy between angelology, medieval angelology, and contemporary technology. So in the book it's a wonderful book. It's a kind of cocktail table book. It's a big fat book. I'm going to hold it up here. Big fat book. You can see on the cover is one of Fra Angelico's paintings of an angel. And if you go inside the book, you'll see lots of reproductions like that of angels. Now, if you take a look at that particular angel and its wings, they'll juxtapose that with a picture of contemporary airplanes. And look at the wings on those airplanes, and then look at the wings on Fra Angelico's angels. And you'll see instantly the kind of analogy he's building. So the book is this it's also a story, but it's an elaboration of the analogy that he's interested in. First and foremost, what we just saw with those pictures was flight. The angels are capable of traveling distances. They travel through the air. They're not bound to the earth. They are so we picture them as birds. And modern aviation comes from the Latin avis, for bird. And they're capable of traveling distances in the scriptures instantly. Right, so they travel what in the pre-modern world was called at the speed of thought, and we would say now, well, they travel at the speed of light. Right? They travel as instantly as it's possible to travel. So, what's the angel? Well, it's first of all an anticipation of the human desire for flight, and it is also, as the very word itself suggests, angelos, message. It's an instant message system. When God wanted to get a message to Abraham really quickly to interrupt what Abraham was about to do, once God saw that he was going to do it, God needed to communicate with Abraham instantly. And so, of course, he sent an angel who is an I am system. Classical I am system. Sayre says we've got three sort of iconic figures in the history of Western civilization. The very first, he says, is Hermes, and from whom we get the word hermeneutics, unless it's the other way around. It's actually possible that the Greek word hermenein was the word that they took the name Hermes from that. It's possible, but I'm not quite sure which way that goes. But either way, Hermes is the god of messaging. He's a magnificently interesting Greek god because he's a trickster. He's a god of a whole bunch of different things, of commerce, communication, travel, and but what's interesting, the early images of Hermes is he's a trickster. So he says that there's this ancient Greek figure of communication who basically loses his job after the birth of Christianity to the angels. He's displaced by the angels who take over all of the classical functions of Hermes. And today is being displaced. Now he doesn't use this name, but is today being displaced by Watson. So we go from Hermes to the angels to Watson, to the super intelligent computer who and instant global messaging systems. Hermes, angels, Watson. In elaborating this analogy, he goes through a series of characteristic traits of the angels. We've just seen them: flight, messaging, intelligence. One of the things we know, one of the things that was believed about the angels in medieval philosophizing about them, was that they were highly intelligent. Human reason was sort of plodding. It had to go step by step through an argument, but angels have intuitive intelligence. So angels have nous, whereas we have logos. They have intellectus, where we have ratio. They instantly understand things. They have what Kant called intellectual intuition. We don't have it because we have to work through our bodies. They're not limited by their bodies. So they were super intelligent. And super intelligence is, of course, one of the features of evolving AI systems. What we're moving towards are AI systems. That will dwarf human intelligence eventually, both in terms of speed and comprehension. Angels are guardians. Right? We have guardian angels who whisper in our ear about what to do and what not to do and where to go. And today we have GPS systems. We have our own invisible electronic systems which guide us about. One of the interesting things about these super intelligences who greatly surpass us is that they're capable of going bad, going south. The angels come both good and bad, and so we have the prospect of a super cure to all of our ills, or a super poison that is going to kill us. And right now, so they're ambiguous figures. They're like what TOC says about the holy. The holy is both tremens and fascinans. The fascinans part is what draws us. The tremens part is what scares the daylights out of us. So because that's the demonic and the divine and the demonic. Well, angels come both divine and demonic. And so the enormously enhanced power and intelligence of the angel is capable of, when it goes bad, is capable of the worst. And so we have today all of the ills of advanced technological weapons and all of the unforeseen ills of the manipulation of information and the degradation of truth. So angels come both good and bad, and the scriptures that first produced these beings, and then the medieval theologians who theorized them, took that into account. Then there's the debate that went on between the Dominicans and the Franciscans in the medieval metaphysical theology about their metaphysical makeup. And the Franciscans maintained, Thomas Aquinas maintained, that they were pure forms. They had no matter whatsoever. They were forms without matter. They were the absolute purity of the type of being that they were. They were not their essence was not received into matter. They were pure immaterial beings, or as he called them, separated substance, separated from matter. The Franciscans, on the other hand, partly because they had an affection for the natural world, and partly because they were looking for an explanation of the finitude of angels. They wanted to explain why angels weren't God. Said that they had to have some kind of matter, and so therefore they had a kind of celestial matter. So they had a fiery, airy matter, but not a wet, solid matter. They had two of the elements, but not the other two. They were fiery and airy. So they had these celestial materiality. And we see that today in electronic systems, which are shedding the limits of materiality, and they turn the old joke about angels into a very interesting point. That is, the angels in early modernity, in the birth of modern science, were mocked as superstitious creatures. Well, they were fictions, but so what? Fictions are really pretty interesting and pretty important. So they were mocked as purely fictitious, superstitious entities, and the mockery took the form of how many angels could fit on the head of a pin. Well, that's actually turned out to be one of the most important questions you could possibly ask in contemporary technology. It's called nanotechnology. How much information can you possibly fit on the smallest possible particle? So that problem in medieval angelology is being replayed right now. All of the principal features of angels are anticipations of contemporary information technology. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Michel Serres is like Gilles Deleuze. He's got a theory. He thinks in terms of virtual systems and their actualization rather than in linear terms. So he thinks when you look at history, history is not simply a linear succession of forms. He thinks that history is the actualization of a sort of common ground or deeper ground, which in Deleuze is called the event. So that the same event could be actualized in one place this way and in another place that way. In the same way, he said if you took Serres' example is if you took a handkerchief and opened it up, and there was a spot here and a spot there, he said if you fold it together, the spots touch. Well, he thinks of history in terms of folds. So he's very proto-Deleuzian. Deleuze was interested in Serres. And he calls this what Deleuze calls this the time of the event. So without trying to go into all of that, let's just say what for Serres and Deleuze is going on here is not that you have a curious analogy between something that happened 800, 900 years ago and what's going on now, but it's the same event. It's sort of like spooky action at a distance in quantum physics, where two things are related to each other, even though they're not contiguous in time or space, and or successive in time and contiguous in space. They're separated, but they're still acting in tandem with each other. Why? Because it's the same underlying event occurring in different places. And that's exactly what Serres thinks about medieval angelology and contemporary technology. Now, that's a very speculative theory of history, but it's a very interesting one. And it also has, it reminds us of quantum entanglement. Now, so then Serres goes on to give you this sort of history of technology, of which, in which this little story that he's telling plays part. He says there's three stages of technology. Early history of technology he calls cold technology, and that's like agriculture and handmade tools, and then the emblem of that is Atlas and Hercules. And there you think in terms of nouns and solid things, and it's a technology of form. Then he talks about the second stage of transformation, which he calls hot technology, and he's talking about the Industrial Revolution. So you have steam engines and railroads, and you have the harnessing of heat and fire for technological purposes. So the first stage was the stage of mechanics. The second stage is the stage of thermodynamics, and then the Greek figure there is Prometheus. And then the final stage is what we're entering into now, the age of information. The age of information, and that's what I'm saying. Theology is going to have to reconfigure according to Tillich's dictum, that it's always listening to what the kerygma has to say from a given historical situation. And I'm saying that the situation in which theology has to conduct its business in the future is going to be the situation, the hermeneutic situation, is the age of information. Serres says that's the age not of nouns or verbs, but of prepositions. It's not cold, it's not hot, it's volatile, meaning flight. It thinks not in terms of things or merely thermodynamics, but in terms of megaentropic systems. It doesn't think in terms of nouns or verbs, it thinks in terms of systems. It's the age of virtual reality. We were talking before we started the podcast about The Matrix, and so you see, The Matrix is really a very prophetic film. It really is um, uh, visualizing for us what it would be like to live in a virtual system. I mean, it's entirely possible. This is a sort of Cartesian thing to say. It's entirely possible we're living in a virtual system right now. That everything around us is a virtual system, and something else is running it. We just don't know what. Now, the figure of this negantropic, cybernetic information system, age of information, he says, is Hermes. And so you could also say those three stages are pre-modern, modern, postmodern, where postmodern now means the age of information, the age of differential systems, the breakdown of substance things and the replacement of them by various kinds of systems where the entire, the environment is a system, the climate is a system, and we're seeing the problems with interfering with that system. Organic life is a system, the planets around the solar system are a system, the galaxy is a system, the universe is a system. What there is are differential systems, in philosophy sometimes called différance. Now, Sayers raises the question, and you also see it in Latour, about whether we have ever, Latour says we have never been modern. What's also behind that is the notion that we have never been human. So when we talk about the transhuman or the post-human, we are in a certain sense making it too simple, because the fact of the matter is we have never been human. If by human we mean something that is more or less independent of or free of or sovereign over technology, as if technology were something external to us, and we ourselves are internal spirits. And so you have the classical distinction between matter and spirit in German idealism, materialism and idealism, history and nature. Those kinds of distinctions, which we're comfortable with, don't bear up under analysis, because if you look into it more deeply, we never were human in that sense, in the sense in which human is somehow or another divided from matter, space-time, and nature. And so then you start thinking about, so what's that mean? Well, what it means is that what we call humans, specifically human, has always been making use of certain kind of technology. We've even language itself, and this is a point that Derrida makes. Even language itself is a technology. It's a system that we have forged, which makes use of artificial signifiers, arbitrary artificial signifiers, to communicate. So the thing that has most deeply defined us, rational animals, the animals with logos, the animals who speak, are animals who use tools. The very thing that made us human to begin with is the capacity to use tools, to make fire, to wear clothing, to use language. All of those things are various kinds of impersonal systems. When you look at language the way post-structuralists do, all the way structuralists and post-structuralists do, as a differential system, it's a neutral, anonymous system of signifiers, of marks. It's not somebody, right? Differential systems, linguistic systems, the capacity to make differential, the capacity to produce significance is signum facere, to make signs. It's a manufacturing process. We produce significations by using signs, by producing signs. And those signs are coded differential signifiers. They are not somebody, right? They're not somebody. They are neutral. They're anonymous systems that we deploy, and they belong to our deepest structure as speaking beings. So Sayers proposes the idea of what he calls quasi-subjects. And you see it in Latour in the notion of actants. So instead of dividing the world into subjects who think and use things and objects which they manipulate, what he thinks is that there are just various kinds of differently graded and integrated quasi-subjects. So you'll see this in the phenomenology of technology. People like Don Idy talk about, is the cane that a blind person is using just simply an instrument, or is it in fact an extension of his body? Does the person using the cane, who's dependent upon the cane, is not his body or her body extended by this instrument, so that you can feel the ground. You feel the ground with the cane, in the same way that you can feel the road with the automobile that you're driving. The body, the division between the body and the cane is porous. The prosthesis is a kind of agent itself. It's a quasi agent, and in that sense, we have always been artificial. We have always been contaminated by technology, and we have always been, from the very start, this is what we call human, enhancing the human with artifacts from the very start. And then that's the question that we face with contemporary technology. And that is what is signified in Derrida's early analysis of the pharmacon. Is this going to cure us, or is this going to kill us? The pharmacon, the best translation of the word pharmacon, to pick up that ambiguity, is drug. Is this drug going to cure us, or is this drug going to kill us? And the problem we have with artificial intelligence right now is exactly that. We are vastly enhancing our intelligence, vastly enhancing our speed and the breadth of our knowledge, and it is not far off when we're going to be able to integrate these things into our body. We're going to be able to interface chips with our brain, and there's already work being done in which the brain can read what we're trying to say. If you have speech and you lost it, there's technology now being developed which will allow a computer chip to read what you're trying to say, and it'll say it for you. It'll get it said for you. And you need to have the language to begin with. They can't just read babies, and they can't read pre-linguistic beings or non-linguistic beings. But they'll read what it is that we're trying to say. Well, what's ahead? What's down the line in work like that? Unthinkable. We can't imagine it. It's just unthinkable. What the transformation that lies ahead. Now, so the question is AI going to kill us, or is it going to cure us? Is it going to replace us? Is it going to enslave us? Is it going to enhance us? Will it always be transhuman, not posthuman? It's going to replace us altogether. Is it going to turn us into curiosities for a post-human world to go visit on Sunday afternoons? One way to put it is to say there are three questions here. The first is, how far can we go? And that's a technological problem. And there's quite a lot of debate about that. We ought not to simply believe everything that these people say they're going to do. So how far can we actually go? How far should we go, which is the ethical humanist problem. And then there's a problem that concerns us, and that is what goes with theology. That is, what does theology have to say about this? What does it have to say about theology, and what does theology have to say about it? And if you think that they're not related to each other, my That's why I started with the Michel Serres, because I think theology and technology are intimately related to each other. And then a reductionism say technology is fulfilling what theology was dreaming about. All the sorts of things, being like the angels. Technologies, we're working on it, right? We're working on it. So the first question is, how far can we go? I mean, we could spend the next 5 years talking about this. To put it in the briefest possible terms, I would say it comes down to this. Is what we call human intelligence a formal system? Or do you need a body? Or to put it the other way, does matter matter? The first answer is matter doesn't matter. The second answer is matter does matter. First answer says, and now this, once again, I have to say, is basically the argument that's going on between structuralism and post-structuralism. It comes down to it, I think. Is human intelligence a formal system governed by rules, like a chess game, where it doesn't matter whether the chess pieces are made of ivory or wood or digital beings, virtual beings? Doesn't matter. What matters is the rules. What matters is the differential relationships and the rules, the elements of the system and the rules of the combination of the elements of the system. Is it a formalizable system? Is human intelligence a complex neural network? If it is, then there is no reason, in principle, why it could not be transplanted, can't say that, transferred to a non-biological substrate, in principle. There's no reason. It might be it's very complicated, it would take a long time, but in principle, we could produce an intelligence which does not suffer all the defects of biological system. We could produce a super intelligence. Now, one of the questions that's involved there is, apart from whether or not it is a complex neural network and nothing more, is whether what you would produce would be super intelligent but not conscious. Would it be conscious? That's what they call the hard problem. Would it be conscious? That is somebody home? The way these guys like to put it. Is somebody home? Is anybody there? That is, after you transferred all this information and all this neural system, would anybody be home? Would anybody be there? Is there a person, a self? Now there are lots of people who think that's the case, that it's a formal system and it's a matter of time until we can transfer it. Some people have extreme views, like Kurzweil. They think they've even got a date in mind. They think 2045 is the time that computer systems will be capable of this. And then there are people who think that it's in principle a mistake. The opposite side, and you see it in someone like Catherine Hales, is it's not merely a formal system. It depends. You need to have a body, and this goes all the way back to Merleau-Ponty, or people like Michael Polanyi. That human intelligence involves all kinds of non-formalizable, implicit, what Polanyi called implicit knowledge, the tacit, preconceptual, implicit body knowledge that is not formalizable and is not explicit. It's not formalizable because it's not explicit. It's implicit. It's presupposed. And if you did produce a being like that, you'd produce some kind of a monster with no imagination, no unconscious, no implicit pre-understanding of things, which you don't even reproduce the explicit part. What you would reproduce would be a zombie, would be a ghost of a human being. It would be nothing you'd want to be or meet. So that's the kind of debate that goes on with the how far can we go question. How far should we go is obviously a is the humanist philosophical, and now you're starting to get into theological problem. And that's the problem of what Derrida called the dangerous supplement, the undecidability, the pharmacon, the promised threat, which goes all the way back to Plato's myth in the Phaedrus about the invention of writing, whether it would destroy the memory of the people or enhance the memory of the people. And then you have the question of the does it kill us or does it cure us? Does it weaken and dehumanize us? Does it political problems like it would actually accelerate and exacerbate the divide between the rich and the poor, because these kinds of technologies would not be available to people who couldn't afford them. The problem of whether we would just simply disappear as a species. So you see that difference here in the question of technology, the new shape that it's acquiring right now. We used to worry about whether technology was going to infringe upon our world, whether it would turn us into reduce us to sort of means ends thinking and degrade us and turn everything into information and destroy imagination. We used to worry about the way it affected our self-understanding. And you see that in people like Heidegger on the one hand, or Jacques Ellul in theology on the other hand. But today, we actually have a much more radical problem. Heidegger and Ellul never imagined that we actually were information systems, that we actually were these cyborgian beings to begin with. They worried about what having radios and televisions and refrigerators and automobiles and railroads and all those things were going to do to us, to our self-understanding. They didn't worry that we were a radio or a television or an information system. And that's what we're beginning to discover right now. We're beginning to discover that our being goes back to a DNA code, which codes the body. And we've now got the CRISPR technology since 2015. We actually have the CRISPR technology to start editing the body, editing the gene. And notice the textual metaphor. Everything that Derrida said about textuality is coming to with a vengeance right now. We are now talking about the possibility of editing that neural network, editing our genes, editing the body, producing tailor-made beings, edited to our designer body, designer children, designer future. What happens to race and gender in this post-human world? The body, the distinction between the body and the soul that classical theology is dependent upon is weakening to the point of disappearing. The distinction between mind and matter is now a completely different problem. The debate about abortion is a debate about ensoulment. And what's the meaning of the word soul? Now, the word soul disappearing, right? I mean, we don't need it biologically, we don't need it philosophically, and it's questionable what we need, whether we need it theologically. Now, that's what we're ultimately concerned about here, as theologians, as radical theologians, thinking about theology radically. What happens to technology? What happens to theology in all this technology? What is it left to say? Is it just simply displaced? Is it just simply, as the old positivists used to say, does it simply belong to the history of the human past that is gradually being displaced by the growth of science and technology? You see this right off the bat with the question of immortal life. O death, where is thy sting? Well, we're working on that. We're working on that. First of all, it's being worked on biologically, because with each passing day we make greater and greater progress to cracking the business of disease and of aging itself. So you have the Methuselah project by this guy, Aubrey de Grey in the UK, where they're working on our telomeres, our telomeres, which basically are the ends of our DNA strings, and they unravel like shoelaces. And if you keep them tightly wrapped, you won't age. And so they call it the Methuselah project, because lifespans would then be measured in centuries, not decades. So just on a purely biological level, human life is being extended, will be extended, definitely. They say the first person to live to be 150 or 160 has already been born. I read that a couple of weeks ago. But more interestingly is the post-human project, the post-human project, where we really would just we'd go to the root of the problem, which is having a biologically corruptible system. We would just simply get rid of it, transfer human intelligence to another sphere altogether. Now, even that actually, so and it would also be an answer to the degradation of the environment, because we could with that kind of reconfiguration of human intelligence, we would not be dependent on the Earth anymore. So you have these, extravagant postulations. We would be in fact working on a technological version of the glorified body. Now, so one question you could ask yourself as a theologian is, what happens to Christianity in all of this? Is the Christ event intrinsically linked to our body, our biological body? The defining feature of theologically of Christianity is the incarnation. In plus caro carnis, flesh. Well, what happens if we have effectively shed our carnal life? Has the incarnation at that point run its course? Should we think that the business of the incarnation had to do with flesh, it had to do with carnal being, carnal life, had to do with embodied beings? And at the point at which that ceases, has the incarnation run its course? I mean, even without this extravagant projection of the future in AI systems, we know for a fact that human life is time bound. It is based upon this Earth. If it doesn't find some way of getting off this Earth, the sun is expanding. It's going to turn this Earth into a piece of toast, and biological life, the life of the species will get wrapped up. At which point, then you would want to say, well, wouldn't you want to say then? Well, then the incarnation's job is, if they're the tools on the truck at that point, the incarnation's job is finished. Well, suppose we come up with some kind of post-carnal life, post-human, post-carnal. Has not the role of Christ been, let's say, on the one hand, rendered obsolete, or on the other hand, let's say, completed? It's over. And now, whatever form religion would take would be post-Christian, radically post-Christian, because it would be post-incarnation. There would be no incarnation. The incarnation had to do with carnal beings and the resurrection of carnal beings. Both of those things would be rendered obsolete. Or would you want to go on and say that Christ is in some way or another a figure, or as TOC said, a symbol, that would still continue to have relevance? Symbolically. No longer, in other words, even the TOC would say the incarnation is a symbol to begin with, but it would turn out to be a symbol in an even more radical sense than TOC imagined. That is, maybe it's a cosmic symbol about so that the death of Christ would symbolize the death of the species, the whole species, not individual personal death, the death of the whole species. Maybe even, here's another interesting thought, maybe even a cosmic symbol. So that Good Friday would be, as Hegel said, a speculative Good Friday. Good Friday would be a symbol, a religious symbol, of the expansion of the universe into oblivion. I mean, on one hypothesis, it's not just one hypothesis, it's the dominant hypothesis right now. The universe is expanding into oblivion. Everything is moving farther and farther away from everything else at an increasingly accelerating rate. And the end of this thing, so even the smallest particles will begin to separate from each other, and subatomic particles, and eventually everything will degrade into a completely potential field of nothing. So, potential field with nothing to excite it or activate it. And there'll be creatio ex nihilo, creatio destructio ad nihilum, into nothing. And in which case then the crucifixion would be a cosmic symbol of the temporal arc of the universe itself. What would happen in the post-human stage, what would happen to the notion of inherited sin if life is not passed along biologically? All life would become a matter of immaculate conceptions, and there would be no more need for sexual reproduction. Could it turn out that the Trinity would have a new significance, in that the final age of the universe would become the age of the spirit? As you've seen in the history of eschatological thinking, Joachim of Fiore had this thing about the three ages of the world, and the last was the age of the spirit. Well, how about a final culmination of the history of the universe in the age of the spirit, where the age of the spirit is now the age of super intelligence, a super intelligent information system, a collective super intelligence. Because on one version of this stuff, individual intelligence is absorbed into and assimilated into a super intelligence. So that the collective super intelligence is created, and, of which all individuals participate. They wouldn't participate as a single individual. They would participate in their sort of assimilation into the whole thing. So it looks on the one hand like noosphere, the noosphere in Teilhard de Chardin, but the people who know Teilhard tell me that Teilhard would not condone this notion of the loss of individuality in the noosphere. But that's what's being envisaged in this AI world. What you would get is a surprise ending to Joachim the Furious prophecy, the age of superintelligence. The age of suffering, Jesus' death, his solidarity with our suffering and pain would be rendered obsolete because we would have simply passed beyond the stage of carnal suffering. So you really would have a radically new world to think about, and it would be increasingly post-Christian. And then the question would be left is, if you concede that it would be post-Christian, if you identify Christ with the incarnation and therefore with flesh and therefore the human, it would be post-Christian. The question would then be, would it be post-religious? Would religion itself have lost all sense? Would it have been totally absorbed in superintelligence? Or what? Would you still have, if you go back to TOC, what matters is ultimately the distinction between the infinite and finite, conditional and the unconditional. Would you not still have a question of finitude? In the light of the expansion of the universe into nothing at all, even a superintelligence would eventually submit to the second law of thermodynamics and the law of entropy, and it too would end up in entropic dissipation. Would religion then reconfigure as what Heidegger called the mystery of being? That is to say, the ultimate incomprehensibility of being itself. Where the word incomprehensible doesn't mean unintelligible, it means unable to be comprehended. Where the word comprehend means grasped round about. That is rendered fully intelligible, totally comprehended, turned into what, remember Ioannis Climacus said, the world is not a system for us, but it is for God. We would never be able to acquire the system in Ioannis Climacus' sense, or the Hegelian sense. We would never be able to get the Begrif. The universe would always be a mystery to us. And you see that in contemporary physics itself, because the more contemporary physics, and particularly quantum physics, learns about the world, the crazier it seems, the more utterly confounding it seems, the more mysterious it seems. So you have this thing that John Wheeler said, that think of knowledge as an island, and as the island in a sea of ignorance. As the island of knowledge grows larger, the shoreline of ignorance increases. The more we learn, the more we discover we don't know. You have, even if somehow or another we could get our head around what's going on in our universe, we've got the possibility of multiple universes, of alternate universes, maybe even of an infinity of alternate universes, in which every possible quantum possibility would be actualized. So the world still spreads out before us. The universe still spreads out before us as incomparable mystery. And so wouldn't religion then take a wholly new form in this post-human world? But you would still have a religious relationship to things, intelligence, whatever form of intelligence would be there, would still have to deal with this distinction between finite and infinite, and therefore what's infinite and ultimately incomprehensible. Now, one interesting thing is that one of the last books that Stephen Hawking wrote was called The Grand Design. Pick that book up and look at the first chapter. He says, it's entitled The Mystery of Being. I'm not making that up. That's the title of the first chapter, The Mystery of Being. And he's saying, we used to go to philosophers for questions like this about the mystery of being. We can't anymore because philosophy's dead. And when he says philosophy's dead, he means philosophers are philosophy. They're reading unreadable papers to one another at the American Philosophical Association, and they've lost contact with science. They've lost contact with. They're interested in metaphysics. Well, if you're interested in metaphysics, then you've got to learn a whole lot of mathematics, because what there is, what's out there, what exists, what is, has a great deal to do with mathematics. And it's the physicists who are the metaphysicians. It's the physicists who are opening up the mystery. So it's interesting. He's saying it's the physicists who are doing the job of philosophy, not because they pretend to know it all, but because they're running into the mystery of being in a way that philosophy talks the talk, but it doesn't walk the walk. It doesn't, it's not looking where the real mystery is. So would you have a point? And then, yeah, I think in the first edition of my own religion book, I pointed to the survival of religion in advanced age of advanced technology from the Star Wars movie, where for all the technology, this force that they talk about has a distinctly religious dimension to it, a mystical dimension. So I could imagine that religion would reconfigure in this future world around the notion, around a much more mystical idea of religion, where mysticism would mean a kind of reverence at the mysterium tremendum, which would be rethought now, not in terms of the old stories from the scriptures, but in terms of a scary new world of advanced AI systems. So that's a kind of lightning quick sketch of the sorts of problems that face thinking theologically in a radical way about the future. Because I do think that that's what's ahead. I mean, if I were 50 years younger, I would think that's what's ahead. That's what I'd be working on, because I think that's where we're going, whether we like it or not. And I think it's not only where we're going. I think we're already there to a certain extent. We've already run into this new world, brave or not new world already. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what's next.
All right.
Das ist alles.
What, as you were talking, one thing that came up for me was a book of Tillich's that we've mentioned before called the Courage to Be, right? And yeah. there are different forms of anxiety in Tillich, right? There's anxiety of death, right? Anxiety of something else, I forget, and anxiety and the anxiety of meaninglessness or meaning, right?
And the last one's the anxiety of guilt. Remember, he's a Lutheran.
There we go. Right. And so something that I was thinking about, especially as you were mentioning, like Heidegger and Ellul, right? is the anxiety of meaninglessness in the face of the sort of objectification of what it means to be human, right? Or the loss of that thing that escapes objectification. So, so just to make it really practical, like, there are people now, a little younger than me, that have never not had on access to the internet all the time, right? And that's just not like part of what it means to exist, right? And yet, like, we have all these little bits of information constantly flooding into our lives, right? And yet the rates of depression and anxiety are skyrocketing, right? And so this is a big question. This is a big existential question, a big Talikian question that I think we need to ask of the transition, right? The transhuman moment, if we want to call it that, is why, in the face of this increased sharing of knowledge, do we have this like reaction of an evacuation of meaning, right? And it seems that there's no solid ground to sort of stand on. And so I think, for example, in Heidegger, when he's critiquing technology, it seems like Dasein, right, in Heideggerian language, just the person for whom being is a question, the person for whom the most important and non-objectifiable depths of existence come to know themselves in this being, right? It seems like the turn to that, right, is at least recognizing some sort of existential problem that comes along with the technologization of humanity. Does that make sense?
It sure does. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the question of anxiety is, as our understanding of ourselves and of our world and of our history increases, the question of anxiety increases. The anxiety before the abyss that spreads out before us, as we learn more and more that we're just this little speck of dust in the infinite universe. With the birth of modern science, when the age of anxiety sets in after the birth of after the Enlightenment, after the age of the Enlightenment, we start to understand more and more about our world, and suddenly you have geniuses like Kierkegaard, who have these deep intuitions of what's going on in our hearts, and it's a much deeper anxiety. I mean, Augustine had a sense of it, but it was very much in terms of an individual before God. And what we've come to understand, that this has to do with the whole species. It has to do with life itself. It has to do with the Earth and the solar system, the whole universe. So the more we come to understand about things, the scarier it gets, and the more uncertain we become, and the less we have to fall back upon. Now, on Tillich's terms, I remember I mentioned talking about Tillich at one point, that somebody years ago had written a book called Dynamics of Doubt, in which he said, Tillich could have called this book Dynamics of Doubt just as well as he called it Dynamics of Faith, because the dynamics of doubt gets you back to the ground of being just as well as does what he's calling the dynamics of faith, because ultimately they're sort of the same thing. And so he's saying, the more profoundly stirred, in both the good sense and the bad sense of that word, stirred, we are, the more deeply, the deeper our being, the more profoundly we are in touch with who we are, and who we are is this being who, as Augustine said, is a question unto itself. So, sort of the faith is in the doubt. We're saved by doubt, not by faith. The answer is in the question, in asking the question, and raising the question, because to raise the question, as Heidegger says, is to make yourself open to something. To ask a question in the deepest sense. In a way, he didn't even question the idea of the question. because he said even that sounds too much like we're in charge and we're interrogating something when we ask a question. So he said rather even than talking about a question, it might just be better to talk about openness to the mystery. And an openness to the mystery, what you really mean it. You're not. It's not a way of being pious and reverent. You really are open to something that it's the coming of what you don't see coming. Now, when you do all that, and so when you're stirred in this profoundly unsettling way, you're also in touch with the ground being until it's stirred. You're resonating with the unconditional at that point, and you've broken the grip of everydayness, is how to put it. And you've gotten in touch with the depths of your being. The problem is the depths of your being really are a mystery. We really don't know. You know, this. I love mystical theology. I love the mystics. I love the history of mysticism. But what I don't like about it is that it's infiltrated by Neoplatonism, and that means ultimately the mystic. When the mystic says we don't know, that's praise. That's praise for the incomprehensible depths of God. Now, I would say that's a cop-out. I think what you need to say is, we don't know, and we ain't kidding. We don't know. We really don't know. That's not praise. We're not praising nothing. You know, we're in anxiety. And the depths of our being, Stoics would say, is to come to grips with that, the courage to be. Yeah. That's what I mean by radical theology. Radical theology says we really don't know. We are not praising anything. Confessional theology has always got a grin on its face. It's always got a deep sense of trust. It's okay. I don't care how bad it is. It's okay. Fear not. I will be with you for all days. Fear not. That's confessional theology. Radical theology says, wake up. Which is a good way to, why I put this at the very end of a little mini course on radical theology. Here's the radical. Here's the radical.
So one of the things that popped up to me, I know we don't have a lot of time because you got to drive grandchildren, is how much.
Excuse me, I got to interrupt. My 5-year-old grandchild is one of these people that Jake was talking about. Cannot imagine a world without apps. She had a magazine once, and she started going like this with her thumbs on the picture in the magazine because she wanted to expand it.
My 2-year-old climbed up on top of the chest in front of the TV and started trying to drag pictures off the TV.
There you go. There you go.
The one of the things, and I don't know if you want to talk more about it, is how your philosophy of mind radically shapes how you would interpret theologically the challenge or question that our growing pace of technology shifts, right? Like the computational model or information model has in it certain metaphysical assumptions that in some sense are allergic to a large number of theological schools of thought or whatever. But also its explanatory power is a giant threat to the dualism, the different types of dualisms that get reinserted. So for people that are participating in this that may not have a philosophy background, or the conversation between kind of a physicalist and the dualist and a panpsychist and those types of theories of mind, like how does technology rework the way we ask that question?
Well, I think the answer to that is it displaces the debate between matter and spirit to a different level. The debate's no longer about matter and spirit. Once you say E equals MC squared, that argument's over, I think. It's rendered obsolete. I think it resets it on a different level. And that is, I just might be an old guy who's still attached to Jacques Derrida. I think it resets it on a different level, and that is the debate about programmability. Are these systems programmable? Or is the heart of intelligence unprogrammability, which keeps the system vulnerable to craziness and open to imaginative leaps and creativity? And the AI people know this. The AI people, it's not like, Bert Dreyfus made this argument 40 years ago, and the first reaction was a knee-jerk. The AI people, the first reaction was a knee-jerk reaction, and that is, well, we can build one that does that. We can make them big enough and fast enough that we can do all the things that you're talking about. But what they meant was that they could run through an infinite number of finite possibilities really quickly to figure out the right answer. And Bert was like, yeah, but it doesn't work like that. Human intelligence doesn't work like that. It's not computational. It's insightful. Well, the new generation of AI people says, Bert Dreyfus is right. We got to build computers like that. We got to give them imagination, creativity. They have to be able to learn, correct themselves, and make imaginative leaps. That's what we need to do. So I think that's where the argument, that's how technology redefines that argument. And that's the argument, excuse me, but that's the argument that was going on between the structuralists and the post-structuralists. Is this a formalizable system? Is it programmable? Or is what's really interesting about the system its ultimate undecidability? When Derrida uses this word undecidability, he's taking it from Gödel. Gödel was saying the system can't be complete and consistent at the same time. And that, I think, is the argument.
So
it's in that imaginativeness and unforeseeability that the mystery arises. And that's where I would relocate a more radical notion of religion, in the sense of mystery.
So would you say something like the questions, or that battle between the structuralists and the post-structuralists, which you might want to unpack just a bit for everybody, the post-structuralist is on the side of some type of vitalism to life, where in the end it's not all accountable in the structures of zeros and ones. You're not just at the base of things, a set of binary abstractions.
Yeah, structuralism is a theory that says that we have to do, whatever it is, language, culture, whatever it is, we have to do with a system of elements in which there might be an indefinite number of elements, but there's a finite set of laws of combining the elements. And if you formulate the law, then however many different elements there might be, or however different the elements might be, we understand the law, because we know how to we know the law, we know the combinatorial laws. And it wouldn't matter whether they applied it to, Levi-Strauss applies this to culture. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about cooking or women or money or South Pacific natives or Manhattans. There are formal systems that have combinatorial laws, and structuralism isolates the laws. Derrida's and the post-structuralists, not just Derrida, but all the post-structuralists, were reacting against that, and they wanted to make room for this. So that would affect closure, and they wanted to resist closure. And so Derrida gives a complicated argument in grammatology about why he thinks that the law, any set of laws that would regulate the combination of elements, would be itself a subset of the elements, and therefore couldn't be contained by the system. Would always outrun the laws. The structuralists were very resistant to the idea of history. Right? They wouldn't say it was the same laws being repeated, and Derrida was saying, no, it's not. Look at the history of language. You could only formalize a linguistic system if everybody was dead that spoke the language. because then there wouldn't be anybody who's going to come along and coin a new metaphor tomorrow, which will change everything. You can only formalize a dead language. If language is still alive, then it's capable of indefinite mutation, unforeseeable mutation. That's where the idea of the event comes from. It was an argument back then. I mean, Derrida didn't invent this word event. That was the system. In linguistics, it was a distinction between langue and parole. Langue was the system of laws. Paroles were the speech acts. So ask yourself, how many words are there in the English language? Well, you might be able to count. How many rules are there of grammar in the English language? Well, you might be able to count if you can decide on specifically. Right now, how many sentences are there in the English language? You can't count. It's not dead yet. We're not dead yet. That's the argument. That's the argument that's going on in a book called Of Grammatology.
That I've got nothing else unless you got anything. I mean yeah, we covered a lot of territory and
we did.
And
as I said at the very beginning, it's your problem, not mine for some.
Well, so the one question that came to mind, and this is mostly just connections that started popping in my head in the first half of your talk. I recently taught a class, a D-Min class on technology and the future of American religion, spirituality, and stuff like that, which kind of meant I invented what I was doing each week. So I just assigned stuff that I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
And I just assigned people that are asking philosophical questions who are a part of the kind of giant growth in technology. And one of the questions that came up in that whole class is there is an ongoing debate about even how you describe technology. And you mentioned something that I was, more interested in what else you would say. Like if language is a technology and we inherit that tool of language as something that's already engaged with the world, so that as we inherit the social knowledge that we get being born, the language, the tools and such, you don't get the tool like you get a hammer and then you figure out what to do with it. It's already engaged in the world. And so your relationship to the world is never unmediated. It's always mediated by this conditioned existence, right? So this sets up for a theology of culture is a technological question. And so in different theories of technology will usually point to something like language or fire as the first technology, because with fire we start cooking our food and then our stomach is actually external to us. You show up 1,000 years later, and if there was no fire, you have no humans. They don't even have the bacteria anymore to digest things, right? And so the story of humans and their technology is not this story of distinctions as if they're very clear. Like we alter the earth with our technology. We alter what it means to be human. And now we're at a place where our technology alters us more than we alter it. And so like when you step back, right, and ask the question of technology, not from our individual narrative and scale, where I joke when I talk about it in public is like technology is whatever was invented after 30 that you were forced to learn how to use, right? Like, so depends on your age as to what counted as technology.
Yeah.
But if you take the big perspective, then, not from your own scale, then I think there's a sense where human nature is not some like settled thing. Human nature is a created thing, and it's a thing that's still in the process. And so much of humanity is tied to our relationship to technology that we wouldn't know how to talk about ourselves without talking about our relationship to technology. And religion does the same thing. Like our contemporary like desire for individualism, democracy, and all that stuff is so enabled by the printing press and our relationship to textual relationship that way, that now when you have the internet and this kind of like extension of human consciousness, connectivity, and all that kind of thing, and then when that technology is harnessed by the anxieties of being monetized by capital and things, you start retrieving different patterns from our tribal past, moving anxieties around and things. And so I mean, I just wonder if there's part of what the challenge of technology is the theological necessity to open up your hand when it gets to anthropology, right? Like so many times we're like, oh, made in the image of God, or, you know, some type of settled anthropology, or we have sin. And now the predicament isn't how you solve being a sinner or how you find participation in life and God and all that kinds of things. Now it's like, what does it even mean to be human, and how can you be one?
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's why people like Bruno Latour and Michel Serres say things like, "We have never been human," and we have to radically rethink what that means. The beginning of being in time, by the way, Heidegger says there are two basic prejudices that have screwed up our attempt to think about human being. One is the philosophical notion of human beings as the rational animal, which sets up the divide. There's the animals, and then there's us. And the other is the theological idea of the image of God. So there's this world out there, and then there's us. We're the image. And Heidegger says you gotta dump both of those presuppositions and start all over again, and begin with what he calls in der Welt sein, being in the world, radically engaged with the world, which is the break with Husserl. Husserl thought in terms of consciousness. So Heidegger refuses to use this word consciousness because it creates that divide. And the only possible anthropology for him would be an ontology of our being in the world. It would be saturated by worldly environment. Now, he did all that, unfortunately, without mentioning the body ever. And because he wanted to be so ontological. He not only want to talk about mind, he wanted to talk about body. He wanted to really be ontological. It was Merleau-Ponty who came along and said, this is the whole new understanding of human embodiment. But then that is, see the people with that kind of view of human existence are, you see that in someone like Catherine Hales. She's going back to Merleau-Ponty and this notion of utter immersion in the world. And there is a phenomenology of technology that comes out of that. And there are people like an older kind of philosopher named Don Ihde, I-H-D-E, who has done a phenomenology, not of subjectivity as in Husserl, but a phenomenology of really of what Bruno Latour calls actants, agents that are neither subjects nor objects, but simply interactive agencies, systems of interactive agencies in which we fit. And we get inserted, when we're born, as you say, we get inserted into this pre-fitted world that's already up and running. And then we step into it, and it makes us, and then we try to make it. And it's an interactive system. And then the question would be whether we can, so to create something then would mean to intervene in those systems in a way that sort of throws a creative monkey wrench into them and gets them going down a different track. Reroutes things creatively, which is why so many scientific discoveries are made, because somebody dropped a scientific instrument and set off a reaction that they didn't expect, and it was a breakthrough. Or they find things by sheer luck, or sheer by accidental symbol, because they intervening in ongoing systems. As soon as we come to be, language is already up and running. The world is already up and running. And what's up and running are vast interconnected systems in which we are nodules. Got a whole world embedded. Merleau-Ponty once said, to learn a language, to understand a language, speak a language is to know how to sing the world. Every language sings the world in a certain way. We're sort of learning the song.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, Jack, you need to go be a grandfather.
I got to go pick up my granddaughter.
And Jake's going to fix all my problems with the future of humanity and how we have a ontology that includes flesh. That, like, I'm looking forward to him explaining this all to me on Thursday.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. It's been fun.
All right. Thanks.
All right.